ahead and make your way back to the front. Maybe I'll give it 10 seconds. Yeah, just intermission. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read out a Nahum. It should be on behind me. This is Nahum 1, verses 2 through 7. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is fierce in wrath. The Lord takes vengeance against his foes. He is furious with his enemies. But the Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will never leave the guilty unpunished. His path is in the whirlwind and storm, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. He rebukes the sea and dries it up. He makes all the rivers run dry. Bashan and Carmel wither, even the flower of Lebanon withers. The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt. The earth trembles at his presence, the world and all who live in it. Who can withstand his indignation? Who can endure his burning anger? His wrath is poured out like fire. Even rocks are shattered before him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in a day of distress. He cares for those who take refuge in him.
Is the word of the Lord. Good morning. If we haven't met yet, my name is Kyle, lead pastor here at Generations, and we know that it takes a lot of kind of time, effort, and energy to step into a gathering like this. I want to speak to you and let you know that your story matters. That's why we have that share your story card on all the tables, because your story matters, because you matter to God, and we want to get to know you and your story. So whether you're here just gathering with us and it's your first time or your 100th time, we want to continue to walk life with you, or whether you're online and just kind of checking us out to figure out what's going on. We know that people will many times watch online before they set foot kind of in the room. Now, for me, and Ruth, we have four kids, and we're going through a new season of life. Our oldest just started middle school, and so middle school has been a learning curve for us, and kind of like not trying to impart all of our middle school trauma on our oldest as we like step into those spaces again. But one of the things that's funny is as I was going through like all the parent-teacher stuff and the curriculum night, one of the rooms that we stepped into was Xavier's history classroom. And on the wall, like the teacher was laying out what they're going to be talking about this year, and was going through, and it was like taking me flashbacks. It was like all the great empires of the world, and it was like go through Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then it was like Greece, and then Rome, and it was like you had all of these like marching around. She's like, we're going to cover all of these developments. And what was reminded to me is as she was even talking, she just would kind of say like, hey, we're gonna address all these, and just know that they've come and they've gone. And as we have worked through this series between heaven and earth, it's important for us to remind ourselves that the great empires of the world have come and they've gone. They've all had a similar and same story. They rise up, they grab power, maybe they even oppress people, and then they fall. The same thing happens again and again, and even though there's some technological advances. And you may be thinking right now, is like, well, Kyle, like, as we think about between heaven and earth, like what does that start to mean for us? And what I would say is simply this. When you read the news, when you scroll on social, when you watch the news, if you're following around, it can feel like the empires and the nations rage. Like everything is in chaos. And as you look at specific regions around the world, it's like there's wars and there's rumors of wars, and it's like, will there ever be peace? And it seems like just the kind of the same cycle again and again and again. Maybe different names, different geography, but same cycle. And maybe you even like are pretty in tune with this. You think of this like just one giant, like for those board game people, like one giant game of Risk. And it's like, yeah, of course, the bigger and the badder, roll the dice and they come in and they conquer, and then someone else comes in and conquers again. And some of you may be thinking, well, yeah, like that was ancient history then, and we kind of see that now, but surely it will be different eventually. But the reality is that violence is everywhere. It has always been everywhere. And some of the conflicts happening around the world right now, they've even been going on longer than America has even existed. But followers of Jesus aren't supposed to be afraid of that. We're supposed to ask a different question. Not just, will God actually break this cycle, or is this how it's always going to be? But really, what role do we play in the world as we stand between heaven's hope and earth's brokenness? Because we could feel very overwhelmed as we wait for heaven's hope and as we experience earth's brokenness. And so that's in a lot of ways why we're going through this series. And we're working through the minor prophets, where it's a series of speeches at different points in Israel's past, where it's calling up the people of God to represent God well and give them a series of poems and images to remind them, hey, if you don't represent God well, here's the outcome. And it's one to not conjure up fear or dismay, but one to conjure up hope. That justice will be served, that there is an end, and there is a God who intervenes within the midst of history, despite what seemingly at times feels like our everyday chaos. And the church, the people of God, are supposed to represent God, the characters and priorities of God within the world now. And so this morning we find ourselves in the book of Nahum. And these prophetic books, really the last three that we've looked at, Jonah, Micah, and now Nahum, all really deal with this empire called Assyria. They were this massive world power where they rose to power, they were strong and mighty, and then they fell. In Jonah, he showed us that God's judgment isn't just for the pagan nations like Nineveh, that it's also for God's own people when they're arrogant and selfish during good times. Because if you are unfamiliar with the story of Jonah, Jonah speaks to this people of Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria, says, hey, repent. They do so, and then he throws a pity party. And is really a petty prophet, and he is arrogant and angry because he wants Israel to keep all of God's love to themselves. And then Micah took it further, where God judged both Israel and Judah for crushing the poor under corrupt leadership. But even in that judgment, God promised a shepherd king who would restore everything. Now we get to this third book, so it's kind of this nice little trilogy in the middle of these larger group of prophets that completes the picture about this nation. It's actually about 100 years after Jonah's ministry, where Assyria had been this great and powerful and oppressive nation, and then they repented, they turned to the God. God relented, gave them mercy, but now here, 100 years later, they're back with more violence and brutality. And this book, at a surface level, if you were to just do it for some leisure reading, it might just seem like this angry rant against Israel's enemies, but it's way more important than that. What Nahum shows us is that God uses evil empires to judge evil, but his people, us, we don't get to use evil for security or gain. Instead, we trust God's justice, which is ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. See, the people of God, driven by the promises of God, are called to break the cycle. Your purpose in your everyday life is to be a cycle breaker. Is to step in and say, I will not push forward injustice, cruelty, immorality. I'm going to stand in and break that cycle because God has moved towards me. And so what Nahum starts out with is this big image of like this overwhelming vision of who God is and stepping in really to the world. It's like who can stand to be right. It's like this thunder image, this power image, and it's kind of to hearken back this idea of like whenever God moves, it's in power. It's people are shaken. It's almost like fearful, and it's to remind us that God is powerful, that He moves within the world, but that also that He relents and withholds His power for a time in certain ways and at certain times so that we can experience His mercy, which is His power expressed in a different way. And so Nahum shows us that God uses evil, specifically evil empires, to judge evil. And the comfort for the people of God is what it says in Nahum 1 verse 7. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in Him. When your world is in chaos, when it feels like you look around on the news or on social and it feels like, man, where are you, God? These promises are to help anchor us in the midst of that. See, Jonah and Micah, this run up to this moment and to this book, show that God is sovereign above all the nations, not just Israel. God sent Jonah to Nineveh, Assyria's capital, and Jonah hated it. And they repented. Micah turns the camera right back on God's people, hammering Israel and Judah for their internal corruption. And then here's what happens. God uses Assyria, this evil, violent empire, as His tool to punish Israel for their sins because they were failing to represent God well and in their time and their place. They were failing to live out the promises of God at that time. Now, it may seem like when you read this, it's like that God is endorsing evil here. He's not. He's orchestrating it for justice. If you think about a surgeon for a second, a scalpel cuts, it causes pain, but in skilled hands, the painful cut removes cancer and saves a life. God can use wicked instruments to accomplish His righteous purposes. Or think about a wildfire. It can be utterly destructive. But sometimes you use controlled fire to burn down brush and debris so you can actually create new growth, to make room for new growth. So the fire isn't good in itself, but it can be used for restoration. It can be a purifying fire. And that's what God does with these empires. He doesn't create their evil. He directs their already existing violence towards His just purposes. But here's the critical part for God's people. Israel was not supposed to copy Assyria's playbook. Israel, remember, is the family of God. They were people chosen by God to represent Him to the world. So He was going to mold them, shape them, give them laws around morality and around His presence to be near and to represent that well, and so that they could then, in a specific time in history, represent that to others so that others could see truly what God is like, His character, His priorities, the way to operate and order society around godly principles. And so when they failed to do that, they were then a poor representation of God to the world. And so He would send these prophets to kind of correct them and call them back Sometimes around here we talk about when we talk about hard things, it's like we're not calling you out, we're calling you up. And that's what these prophets really did, is they truth told in such a way and says, you're not living out God's character and priorities. Be reminded of his promises, what he had given and what the calling he's bestowed on you. Don't be influenced by another playbook. I use those sports metaphors. So what a playbook is a series of scripts that you would run to execute in success in sports. And so what happens is God has given us a playbook as his people. The challenge is we look at someone else and says, I think they're having more success. Ooh, they may have more comfort. They may have more approval. They may have more seemingly money at this time. And it's like, ooh, what, can I use their playbook to get to that same heights? And the Lord has asked us to trust his playbook. And here in this moment, the people of God were not trusting the Lord's playbook. Now, because the Lord is merciful, that's why Jonah and Micah are so good, because he actually tells Assyria, while you're not my chosen people, you have the same opportunity to be in connection to Israel and live out this playbook. He sends a prophet to them. And now, here in Jonah, he does that. Now in Nahum's saying, hey, you were used by God. You were once evil, and then you went good, and then you went back to your old way of living in your old playbook. God can't endorse evil. He can redirect it, but he will not endorse. And so to this tool of judgment, they're not just going to get away with it. And that's where Nahum comes in. So their repentance didn't last. They've gone back to their old ways. And what's so crazy is it's like they've trampled on the grace that they once received. It's like, there's sayings where it's like, what is it? Like you bite off your nose, like spite your face or something like that, where it's like, or you slap the hand that like feeds you. And it's like, there's things, cultural sayings that we have like that. And it's kind of the same idea. That if you've been shown grace and there's a source of goodness that's given that to you, why would you trample on that and run away from it? If you've been transformed, if you've experienced love and hope in the goodness of God in your life, rather than run away from it, I know that can be scary, because it means you might have to change. It means you might confront some things in your past and work through some difficult things. But the call of and the invitation of God is when you have experienced that, to embrace that and not run from it. But here Assyria basically says, I see God, I see you for who you truly are, and I don't want it. And what has happened here is now, because of that, they're going to be utterly destroyed. They've trampled on the grace they once received. And what's so crazy is they've even taken a step further. They truly like mock God. In 2 Kings, there's this story of this Assyrian king in the time of Nahum. And he's standing outside the city that's about to be conquered. And he basically says, you thought that God would save you. He's like, he lists all the nations that have fallen, asks, who among the gods and countries has delivered his land from my hand? How can the Lord deliver Jerusalem from my hand? He's arrogant. It's not just, I don't want anything to do with your God, but it's evil. It just confronts it. It's saying, we're unstoppable, we're invincible, your God can't save you. And God's response is devastating. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord. Nahum 2:13. God is going to silence their boasting through total defeat. And the rest of Nahum 2 and 3 is this graphic and intense poem of slaughter. It compares the city to what Assyria has done to other nations. Its message is unmistakable. No empire is indestructible. Nations rise and they fall. And what makes the story of Nineveh and the nation of Assyria so sad is they knew better. They'd experienced the loving presence of God through the sending of a prophet. They repented under Jonah. They experienced his mercy firsthand and then deliberately went back to their violence and oppression. They had a genuine encounter with God's grace and chose to spit on it. It's like someone who gets pardoned for a crime, walks out of prison free, and immediately commits the same crime again. The judge likely isn't going to be lenient the second time. The writer of Hebrews reflects on individuals who experienced the grace of God and then turn away from it. It says it's a dreadful thing to fall in the hands of the living God. One of the things that we try to talk a lot around Generations Church is I want you to have a full picture of what you're getting yourself into when you follow Jesus. Like, we don't just do this for the sake of trying to be like religious like people, and it's like religious people make us better people, and because we're religious, like life's going to be good and perfect. Anyone who's been following Jesus for a long time will tell you life's not 100% automatic better. The chaos doesn't always automatically disappear. I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. That grace is real. That mercy is available. But treating grace like it's worthless, trampling on it, brings even more severe consequences. And that's what God has promised to this nation. So if you're on the fence about following Jesus, about saying yes to him, we want you to know that you are loved, that your story matters, that the reason we can even say that is because he sent Jesus to die on the cross for you. He wants you to experience that grace and forgiveness and freedom. And so it may take a long time to work through that. It may take him a long time to let him just kind of renovate that heart. To know that you're going to do it imperfectly. That's okay. We're all doing it imperfectly together as we follow Jesus together. And that's what you're going to get here. But I want you to have a sober understanding of what you're getting yourself into, because what that will call you to is self-sacrificial love, because that's what Jesus demonstrated for us. It's calling of breaking the cycle and saying, I'm not going to perpetuate more violence or more backstabbing or, they got what, I'm going to make sure they get what's coming to them. It's no, I'm going to follow Jesus in such a way that I'm not going to push forward negativity, but I'm going to interrupt that and push forward grace. I'm going to withhold my hand when I could exact it, when I'm in a position of authority, and give mercy because much mercy was shown to me. I'm going to be a cycle breaker because God broke the cycle through sending Jesus and gives us a way forward. And so the story of Nahum is one of warning on a big national kind of corporate level to say, if you, Assyria, hey, you rejected the grace of God, and so justice will come. And the way that starts to work itself down is to say, for the people of God, because the church is not a nation state. It's not defined by the kinds of borders that the nations were. It was not defined in the kind of ways that Israel was defined. But no, because of Jesus, we now have access to the family of God. We are the people of God. And so because of that, we now get to live the purposes and promises of God in our time and in our place, which means we interrupt cycles that wreak violence and injustice through our presence, not because we're super religious and pious, but because Jesus has done that for us. And so that is the hope that we have. And so Nahum kind of serves as this warning, because that's scary. Just think about it. I mean, I don't have to, the gravity of that. If you think of your family's got a toxic, dysfunctional situation, to be the one to step in and be a peacemaker, man, that you got to have some gumption. You got to have some confidence. You got to be willing to say, like, I want you to have a sober reality of what that's calling you to do. It's not going to be an easy thing. But your ability, your confidence, your skill set isn't your refuge in those situations. It's the Lord. The Lord is your refuge. You can take confidence not in your ability or your wisdom or your skill set, but by saying, I'm willing to play by the Lord's playbook in this place, in this situation, and trusting that in playing by His playbook, by following His will and His way in this situation, that ultimately I'll get to experience what's best. And the hope is, while not every situation will be solved or every problem will be eliminated or people will think like you or act like you or have it all sorted out or they'll get all fixed, but the hope is that as long as you're playing by the Lord's playbook, that you're in Him, that He is your refuge, then you can have a sense of peace and confidence that when all things will be made new, when there's a new heaven and new earth, that because of Jesus, you will be able to be present with Him and experience that. And so while we wait for that promised reality, we get to practice bringing heaven to earth. So that's what breaking the cycle is practicing bringing heaven to earth where you live, work, and play. So Jesus breaks the cycle and gives us the capacity to break the cycle, which means we don't use evil to create safety or wealth for ourselves. We don't exploit people to get ahead. We don't manipulate systems for our gain. We don't resort to violence to win. Instead, we pursue justice and trust God's timing through the power of the Spirit working in you and Jesus. Because Jesus declared war on sin and death, not by inflicting violence, but by absorbing it. He took it into Himself on the cross and defeated His enemies, defeated sin, Satan, and death through the resurrection. On the cross, Jesus takes all violence, all the oppression, all the evil of human history into Himself, and He rises from the dead, breaking this power and starting a completely new kind of family that operates by self-giving love instead of self-preserving violence. And that's what we push forward. And Hebrews 10 talks about that we have this enduring hope till we have this better and lasting possession. So when we're broken, we take refuge in God. When we feel shame of our own failures, exposed and vulnerable, Jesus covers us with His righteousness, that we are washed clean. There's no need to hide, no need to hit back. God doesn't break the cycle by making us stronger sometimes than our enemies. He breaks it by making us different from them. Paul picks up on this theme in his letter to the Romans. It's another Hittite empire, an empire that was influencing all kinds of nations around the world. And what Paul writes in Romans, at the peak of the Roman Empire, he says, for faithful living, love genuinely, honor one another, be patient in suffering, live in harmony, and do not repay evil for evil. Why? Because light shines brightest in darkness. While God uses evil to overcome evil from a national perspective, the church isn't called to function like a nation state. We're not trying to establish a Christian empire or seize political power to enforce God's will. We have the tools to live faithfully under any government in any nation. The church doesn't need a specific kind of government to exist and thrive. Whatever it is, we just live and respond to who Jesus is and what He has done as the people of God in this place. We've existed under Roman empires, medieval monarchies, democracies, communist regimes, anything. Do I wish certain things were different in our society, in our world? Absolutely. But that's why he's given his church the promises and called them to be present where they are, where he has placed them. Someone that I just want to briefly introduce you to is someone who's kind of been thinking in this response, kind of this contrast society, this alternative society. So when we look at the nations and we say, God, there's evil all around. There's wars, there's rumors of rulers. How do we live faithfully? How do we truly live as if you were our refuge? Leslie Newbegin, who's a missionary in India, came back and reflected on the West. And what he did is he says, the primary task of the church isn't to run the world, let God do that, but to be a sign and a foretaste and an instrument of God's eternal kingdom. That we don't need to control society to be faithful, but we can influence, we can love, we can seek justice, but we truly embody an alternative way to be human. One that's marked by sacrificial love rather than self-preservation. Because we can't bring heaven to earth using the tools of hell. So what does this look like? 4 ways, and I'll get you out of here. We learn to de-escalate conflict instead of escalating it. You know, in those moments when you have the opportunity to needle someone, to ramp up the energy, when you have the power and the influence to do that, we use those powers for good, not evil. So maybe you withhold a word or you redirect the conversation. You become a person who diffuses tension in tense situations rather than making them worse. So as a church, we must learn to practice de-escalation of conflict instead of escalating it. We also need to cultivate opportunities to interrupt violence within our communities. I don't know, again, just the other day, there was someone right down here in Hazeldale who killed someone and then shot themselves. It was like a 2-person. It's been all over the news, and 7-Eleven is where it happened. That grieves my heart, and that should grieve yours. And so we should think and create ways and opportunities where we're interrupting violence as a church. Maybe that's showing up to school events and saying, we're going to be people of peace. We're going to promote positivity. I don't know what that is, but what it does is it gives us the capacity to think creatively about how we step in and love well, where we interrupt violence with presence and we get creative. And so that may mean using our voice and our vote to make sure that our systems protect the innocent and deter evil. Protect the innocent and deter evil. That's what we are to seek through our structures and our systems. Number 3, we should do the internal work to engage with wisdom, not just anger. Some of us need to pursue emotional maturity. Because we can't actually step out on a collective or maybe in a purposeful way in our community because we're not settled internally. Every little thing triggers us. Every little thing feels like a slight, or I've got to get ahead, or I've got to get an edge. So we have no way to treat that backstabbing coworker with kindness because we're so overwhelmed and overcome by that. And so what we're able to do is to say, no, my purpose of God is to break the cycle, to not repay evil from evil. And so we can believe the best and we can work the best. We can be wise, but we say, I'm not going to retaliate. I'm going to think differently in this scenario. We can be confident in who God is and that he is working all things to his good, and we don't have to control. So maybe we slow down when we feel that rise. And number 4 is focus your energy on spheres where God has actually placed you. Some of you are allowing so much of your mind and your heart's real estate to be taking up with things you don't actually have influence over. And so my prayer for you is that if you're consumed or concerned, that the greatest what you're consumed with ultimately be of how has Jesus lived well, where you have influence. And so some of you need to remind yourselves and just simply write down my home, my family, my workplace, where I go to the gym, or where I go, where you do your hobbies. I don't know, where you go play disc golf, like where you play volleyball. And say, that on my sports team, with my grandkids, that's the influence that God has given you. Let that real estate be what consumes you and how you represent the love of God well there. I pray that the Lord brings us favor within our community so that we can influence more, not because we want more power, but because we want the love of Jesus to spread. We want the goodness of God. We want his ways. But until he's given that to us, I'm not concerned with it. He's given us small pieces and slivers. We're doing Thanksgiving baskets. We didn't talk about today, but we're going to pack bags for 100 kids and families over the Thanksgiving holidays to make sure that they have food. That's a small sliver of influence. He's given us that responsibility, so that is what we will do as a church. That is what we are called to. And so for us individually and collectively, let the real estate of our minds and of our hearts be consumed with what he has entrusted us. So maybe you and us, we find those creative ways. What I find is that through the power of God and the Spirit of God in this place and really in the people of God, if we are committed to that here and now, he will give us the creative capacity. He will give us the way forward. And it starts not by fixing everything out there, but it starts with a growing internal change, us recognizing that we can change and our influence is where our feet have been planted. And so while God uses the nations to judge the nations, to confront and contest evil, may we do that here and now with where he has given us influence. And if we do that well, he may give us more. But we're not concerned about that right now. We're concerned by being everyday people committed to expanding the family of God because of Jesus for generations to come. That is who we are, and that is what we will seek. And so together, may we do that. And may you practice that individually by de-escalating conflict, by using your voice and cultivating opportunities to resist violence, to do the internal work, and focus our energy on where God has actually placed us.